Can you hear me now? There we go. Okay. I'm Mary Holland. I'm a research scholar at NYU Law School, and I had the privilege of working with this talented group of international lawyers who produced the report that they will be discussing today. With no further ado, I want to give the floor over to Ivanna Bilych, who is the General Counsel for Razom, the sponsoring organization for this international legal analysis. Ivanna.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. Please allow me to welcome at the outset the dignitaries, organizations here to discuss with us the crisis in Ukraine and its legal dimensions. We welcome the United Nations diplomatic community. The representatives to the United Nations from Canada, Croatia, Montenegro, Poland, Germany, all of the diplomatic community, United Nations diplomatic community. We welcome members of the NGO community at the United Nations, many other national and international organizations represented in this audience. Before I start, I would like to thank you all. First, I thank you all for convening at this significant venue. Here we underscore the grave threat this crisis presents to the international law and order embodied by the United Nations and to the world peace and prosperity that the United Nations represents. Thank you to the esteemed panel of co-authors for their superb work and dedication to international law and order, global peace and security. I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to Mary Holland, who supervised the project and kindly agreed to moderate today. I would like to thank Matthew Mosner, Gerald Lebowitz, Stephen Holmes, Ethan Berger, Patricia Rollins for their time and valuable comments. Thank you to Amy Heading, the Assistant Director of the Public Interest Law Center, for her guidance and support. Special thank you to Oksana Lasovsky for her mentorship and support. And final thank you to the wonderful Razom team for their hard work, dedication to free and united Ukraine and democracy. As the crisis in Ukraine continues to escalate, Ukraine faces the urgent and daily threat of imminent invasion and war. It is vitally important that the international community develop a clear shared understanding of the legal tools available to counter the threat. To this end, the Ukrainian-American human rights organization Razom for Ukraine commissioned the groundbreaking report entitled The Crisis in Ukraine, Its Legal Dimensions, which also became known already as the White Paper. Written as a pro bono service by the international team of lawyers based at the New York University School of Law, the report is the first and only report of this scope providing a comprehensive analysis of the current situation in Ukraine from the perspective of both domestic and international law. The purpose of the report is to assist policymakers and governments, analysts and media, international and non-governmental organizations, business, academic entities, to understand what has happened, what is happening now, and what might happen. We cannot afford to be silent today. It's really black and white. There is too much at stake for the whole world, for the international community, for every nation, for all citizens of this world. Russia's actions strike at the very heart of international law and at the fundamental principles of the United Nations that have helped preserve peace since World War II. If we allow this framework of international law to be dismantled, we run into the risk of a new world war and a different global order. In the report, we examine the immediate political and legal developments leading to the domestic crisis and outlines the options Ukraine might have to redress the wrongdoing that have occurred. We also explored the often overlooked geopolitical role of energy in the evolving crisis. Ukraine and Crimea in particular are critical to the Russian natural gas infrastructure and its supply lines to Eastern and Western Europe. Before the crisis, Ukraine tried to decrease its heavy dependence on gas imports from Russia by increasing its domestic production. The report analyzes this critical energy dimension. The report reviews Crimea's unconstitutional March 16 referendum, Russia's use of force to annex Crimea, the right to succeed, the precedents of Kosovo, Republika Srpska, and Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. and the rights of Crimean Tatars as indigenous people. The white paper analyzes the legal issues that may arise if Russia uses force in eastern Ukraine. Because Russia currently maintains a significant troop presence at the eastern border, these issues are pertinent to understanding the situation fully. We looked at Ukraine's international security arrangements, including the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, to which Ukraine, Russia, the United States, United Kingdom, France, and China are parties. That memorandum memorialized Ukraine's delivery of its nuclear weapons to Russia in exchange for security assurances from all nuclear powers on its territorial integrity. We outlined significant military law issues, including Ukraine's Black Sea Fleet treaties with Russia regarding Russia's naval bases, as well as humanitarian law requirements for combatant identification and territorial sovereign rights. The white paper discusses Ukraine's possible countermeasures against Russia and the sanctions that the European Union and other countries have already adopted against key Ukrainian and Russian figures. The table of sanctions shows the sanctions imposed to date. Finally, based on all the above-mentioned analysis, the report makes specific recommendations for Ukraine, for Russia, and for the international community. We expect our recommendations will prompt a solution which will honor the desire of Ukrainian people for unity, sovereign state, territorial integrity, human rights, and democracy. We recommend, among other recommendations, we recommend that Ukraine continue to work closely with the United Nations, the international community, to ensure Russia's troop withdrawal from Crimea, from eastern Ukraine border. Second, that Ukraine brings claims against Russia in the European Court of Human Rights on a wide range of human rights violations. Third, that Russia withdraw its troops from Crimea and from the border with eastern Ukraine, and that it prevents the creation of any new frozen conflict in the world. Finally, we recommend that the international community provide as much assistance to the Ukrainian government, including training, capacity building, and other civilian support as possible. And we find it symbolic that today is May 8th, when we celebrate the end of the World War II, and we really hope the solution will be found to this crisis. Russia is threatening to trigger the next major European war. Do not let this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivanna. I'd now like to give a word to Yuri Sergeyev, Ambassador of Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Distinguished fellow colleagues, dear guests, good morning to everybody. Ukrainian mission to the United Nations is pleased to support the initiative of Razom organization to present to the UN community their own 76-page professionally elaborated report, which was written using high intellectual and analytical approaches, and to my opinion, could become an important step towards a resolution of the current crisis in Ukraine through the means of international legislation. Organization Razom, I should mention, did a very useful and efficient job raising awareness of the American society and wider on the tragic events in Ukraine. These young people brought to the Americans clear facts on human rights violations in Ukraine under the former regime and helped them to understand real reasons of protest, counteracting huge Russian propaganda and disinformation in a Cold War style. They succeeded in this affair because they believed in what they did. Despite the fact that the presented report does not reflect Ukraine's official point of view, being an independent research, I could say that it contains truly integrated and deep evaluation of the current situation in Ukraine. Me personally, I can agree with many ideas stated here, saying about reasons and possible consequences of Ukrainian crisis. I highly evaluate author's serious analysis of the legal frameworks of Russian military occupation of Crimea and all other problems that flow out. Let me briefly present you some remarks on different parts of this report. Starting with one legal notion clarification. inviting you to the fact that substitution of some of the notions should be terminated. There is no civil war in Ukraine. The essence of the conflict is aggression of the Russian Federation against our country, occupation of Crimea, and impudent interference in internal affairs, accompanied by support for terrorist actions against Ukrainian citizens and territorial integrity of the state. This is a basic principle I will count on during my further comments. First of all, I would like to attract your attention to the paragraph B on the page 21st, the assessment of the March 16 referendum in Crimea. Fellow colleagues, they remember the several sessions of the Security Council dedicated to this referendum at the very beginning of it. And I would remind some details. You may remember when 2 months ago, Russian delegation was trying to convince the Security Council that all people in Crimea were dreaming to join Russia and used so-called illegal referendum as a proof. Moscow announced fake results showing a 97% vote in favor of annexation with a turnout of 83%. And now, according to the Presidents of Russia Council on Civil Society and Human Rights report about the March referendum to annex Crimea, the real turnout was a maximum 30%. And of these, only half voted for annexation, meaning only 15% of Crimea citizens voted for annexation. The fate of Crimea, therefore, was decided by the 15% of Crimeans who voted in favor of unification with Russia under the guns of Russian soldiers. Approximately the same numbers were reported by Mustafa Dzhemilov, the leader of Crimean Tatars, at his briefing for the Security Council members at the end of March. You are aware about the decisions taken by the General Assembly, its resolution dated March 94, 2014. This referendum was not recognized, and I quote, others covers that the referendum held in Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol on 16 March 2014, having no validity, cannot form the base for any alteration of the status of Autonomous Republic of Crimea or of the city of Sevastopol. Unfortunately, the same scenario is being played out once again, this time in eastern and southern Ukraine. First, the groups of heavily armed terrorists seized administrative buildings, intimidating local population in towns that were completely peaceful just two months before. Then they demand holding the so-called referenda on a short week's notice, as have just been declared for May 11 in Donetsk and Lugansk. And we all remember that came next in Crimea. Russian peacekeepers sworn in to protect the will of the voters. 2 sessions of the Security Council before I presented this scenario to the colleagues, and the Russian ambassador was so aggressive, telling that I'm bringing the terrific story. But this story now is observed. However, the separatists realized an absolute lack of popular support for their actions and their inevitable failure. And from their intercepted telephone calls to their commanders in Russia, we can hear that they ask for military support and are going to declare falsified results. We state that despite Russian propaganda, it is true that majority population of Donetsk and Lugansk regions support the unity of Ukraine. This has been evidenced by the most recent regional opinion poll called People's Referendum, held May 4, 2014, in these 2 eastern regions. People were proposed to express their opinion on 2 issues. Do you support the territorial integrity of Ukraine? In Lugansk, positive responses gave more than 70%. In Donetsk, more than 72%. exactly what now we know about the Crimea, real figures. The second question, do you support the empowerment of local communities through more powers in fiscal and cultural policies? 85% positive responses. This shows that people do want that more issues to be decided at the regional level, but they want it within one and united Ukraine. I would like to stress once more that is one of the Ukrainian government priority to implement the administrative reform, the main idea of which is real decentralization of power in the country, a significant empowerment of local communities, improving self-governance and regional and district levels. Russian propaganda is trying to present the situation in eastern regions of Ukraine in a completely opposite way. They made up a fantastic number of 94 in favor of joining Russia, which is obviously not true. I'm moving to the next important paragraph of this report about the real human rights situation in Crimea, the problems around indigenous people. Colleagues in the United Nations do remember that the invasion in Russia were organized under the pretext to protect the so-called Russian-speaking population. Several delegations from OSCE and UN discovered that there were no threat to interests of Russian-speaking groups of population of the Crimea, but the serious threats were for the interests of Crimean Tatars and Ukrainian community. Now we are observing a terrific scenario because unacceptable conditions for their lives and security. Crimean Tatars, they're leaving their homeland. Thousands of them, now they are in the mainland of Ukraine. Their leaders stated, and we repeated in the Security Council, that it would be unbearable for the Crimean Tatars to suffer the new genocide. The Russian ambassador reacted very aggressively, but I quoted just what the leaders of Crimean Tatars stated. And now they are collecting the evidences that the actual genocide is being organized against them this time. There are many violations of the rights. A lot of the people they challenge, including this small group of those who are infected HIV/AIDS. Under the Ukrainian law, they have the access to the specific substitutional treatment by opioid, methadone. Russia Federation restricts the use of this kind of treatment in their country. We can't control the situation in Crimea now, and we address this problem to the United Nations specific body on HIV and AIDS. Very important part of the report dedicated to the international security. And on the violation by the Russian Federation, all the agreements with Ukraine and international agreements, including so-called Budapest Memorandum. These days, United Nations headquarters host the Preparatory Committee on Non-Proliferation meeting in 2016. We made several statements during this conference, and last one I presented to the Security Council yesterday. The main message was, I quote, "We witnessed the situation when the Russian Federation undermines the non-proliferation treaty regime not only by violating the Budapest Memorandum, but also by violating the non-proliferation treaty itself, which clearly states that states must refrain and their international relations from the threat of use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner. So the global system has been challenged seriously. All the agreements, all the legal documents adopted during the decades were seriously challenged. A few comments on this part of the report concerning the Black Sea Fleet and other issues in Crimea. In our statement to the third session of the Preparatory Committee 2 days ago, we attract attention of the colleagues to a very serious issue which undermines the legal base previously created between the Soviet Union and International Atomic Agency and between Ukraine and Russia Federation on the Black Sea Fleet. We stress that all nuclear facilities and materials located on the territory of Autonomous Republic of Crimea is a property of Ukraine. You know that there is an institution there. The International Atomic Agency safeguards are applied in accordance with the agreement between Ukraine and the International Atomic Agency for application of safeguards in connection with the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. At the same time, attempts of the Russian Federation to take control over nuclear material and facilities on the Ukraine's territory in Crimea contradict the norms of international law and the International Atomic Agency statute. In the same statement, we also expresses our concern about unilateral actions of the Russian Federation to denounce the agreement between Ukraine and Russian Federation on status and conditions of deployment of Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation on territory of Ukraine, dated May 28, 1997. What is the major problem here? Under provisions of the Article 5 of the agreement, the Russian Federation is obliged not to have nuclear weapons in formation of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation, which is stationed on the territory of Ukraine. As a result of these unprecedented events, and taking into account consideration strategic location of Crimea in the region, we cannot exclude the deployment of nuclear forces of the Russian Federation on the territory of Autonomous Republic of Crimea, which constitutes a serious challenge to the existing non-proliferation regime and must be tackled by the international community. These are several additional remarks to this comprehensive report. I'm grateful to the researchers, to the authors of this report for their activity, what they did, and I understand that you are ready to continue this job. This is very important because the problem in Ukraine concerns the global security, the global principles of protection of human rights. That's why this is the beginning of the story of our common raising of the abhorrence and trying to stop and to save the principles, or the very principles of this organization reflected in the Charter of the United Nations, reflected in the comprehensive Human Rights Declaration. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Sergeyev. I understand that a few other national representatives would like to say a few brief remarks before we go to questions and answers to the authors of the report. Canada, did you wish?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you and Razom for this opportunity to participate at the launch of what is a very, very important report from the perspective of the government and people of Canada. We think this report is a very important contribution to further understanding of this crisis, and particularly the historical, political, and legal issues pertaining to the recent events that we have witnessed in the Ukraine. We congratulate you for presenting a thorough analysis of these issues, and we believe that the recommendations that you have put forward are both pragmatic and measured, and in fact reflect many of the statements that our own government officials have been making with regard to the current situation. But above all, I think that what the report does is underscore the importance of identifying a peaceful and diplomatic solution for this crisis, and in that we commend you. It's no secret to those of you in this room that Canada has been at the forefront of the international community's response to Russia's aggression in the Ukraine. Our Prime Minister was the first G7 leader to visit the country after the end of the Yanukovych regime, and our Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honorable John Baird, has recently traveled extensively throughout the region, through Eastern Europe, consulting with our allies on the crisis and potential responses. In terms of what Canada itself has done since this crisis began, we have imposed a series of travel bans and economic sanctions on Russian and Ukrainian officials that we believe are responsible for this crisis. We did this because we believe that we must send a strong signal to Russia that it is pursuing a path of isolation and that this path will not be left unanswered by the international community. Canada does not recognize and will never recognize the so-called referendum in the Crimea, which in our judgment is illegal and illegitimate and is in fact a Russian annexation of a Ukrainian province. We are committed to support the Ukrainian government during its period of transition, and we are putting our money where our mouth is by providing already over $240 million to assist Ukraine in implementing needed economic reforms to promote democratic and social development. And this includes $200 million in loans or loan guarantees, $20 million to assist the Ukraine in implementing the IMF program, and another $20 million in bilateral technical assistance. In respect of the election of May the 25th, over 500 Canadian observers will travel to the Ukraine to monitor this election and to help ensure that they are free and fair, and that democracy and governance are a cornerstone of the new government. I can assure you, Yudi and colleagues, and all in this room today, that Canada will continue to help ensure that Ukrainians are free to exercise their sovereign rights and to choose their leaderships free from coercion and intimidation as we are witnessing now. I thank you, Madam Chair. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Are there any other country representatives? Poland, I'm sorry, yes, Ambassador, please. And then Latvia.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Ambassador. Thank you for organizing this very interesting and very useful meeting. And thank you very much for preparing the report. Poland fully shares the findings of this document, and well, the position of my government is widely known with regard to the crisis in Ukraine and the legal dimension, the importance of UN legal system is of utmost importance, and we will be underlying this on every occasion. We found the report extremely useful and in our work, and we consider your initiative extremely valuable. We found that this is not only related to the legal aspects of the crisis, but also gives a wider economical background related to energy security issues. With that, I would like to stress that Poland will be continuing our support to the government of Ukraine in the reform process, in particular in decentralization, public finances, and fighting corruption. I would like to again underline our firm position that Ukrainian people need to determine their own future independently, and their European aspiration should be fulfilled. And with that, we look forward to the elections, free and fair presidential elections on May 25th, conducted in accordance with international standards. Let me also seize this opportunity to inform you that to celebrate this year's 25th anniversary of Poland's peaceful democratic transition, Polish Foreign Minister established the Solidarity Prize. It is the first international prize dedicated to the promotion of freedom and democracy across the globe, awarded by a country with a history of successful democratic transition. And it was announced just yesterday that the first Solidarity Prize will be bestowed upon Mr. Mustafa Dzemilev, a Ukrainian leader who has fought for the Crimean Tatars' rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Delegate from Latvia, Ambassador of Latvia.
Well, thank you very much for this report, and I do find that this report is quite detailed, and we would in fact encourage you to develop it further, because we see that it has been largely based on developments in Crimean autonomy. However, there are still other legal aspects that are developing now in eastern Ukraine, so I will have a combination of comment and question. Well, first of all, I think the report is important because the law is indeed the foundation of United Nations, and that was why this organization was established, so that there is a clear set of rules by which all the countries play, and that is why it is important to have these very clear, very legal understandings on what is happening and what has happened. Second, like all other European countries, of course, we are fully supportive of the measures both in support of Ukraine and also in support of the EU sanctions that have been imposed. I have a couple of questions. Well, first of all, one of your recommendations states that the international community should refrain from recognizing Crimea as part of Russia. Well, to the best of my understanding, the way how international community can do that is through a General Assembly resolution, and in fact that's what the international community has already done quite resoundingly by voting with 100 voices in favor. So if there's something else that the authors of the report would see as necessary, because in our opinion that has already been done. Second question is, you mentioned some of the status issues of the military, or rather armed persons without insignia. My question to you as authors would be, how would you qualify those armed persons that are there? Well, I guess there can be also nuances whether or not they are Ukrainian nationals. And finally, just to reiterate that we do support as Latvia the right of Ukrainians and Ukraine to determine its own future, and our readiness to support you in the future as we have done in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. So I understood that there were two questions, one about Crimea and one about the military presence and no insignia. Ivanna?
Thank you so much for your questions, and thank you so much for your support. With respect to the first recommendation and not recognizing Crimea, this report has been done. This is the second release of the report, and we've been working. We put many hours into this, so that has been. I guess we can address this in this next release. Thank you so much for pointing. Thank you for pointing this out. With respect to military with no insignia, I think the international law is very clear, and we address this issue on the page 32 and 33 of the report, and we quote Jonathan Eel from the who is the international director at the London-based Royal United Service Institute, who says that the basic principle in every conflict is combatants must have clear markings and they must belong to a state. If they do not belong to a state, they are classified as mercenaries or petty criminals. They are not entitled to prisoner of war status. Thank you.
Just to add, it was broadly shown by many international TV channels and even published in New York Times some of the pictures and some of the statements of these people without insignia. Many of them from Russia, from so-called Donetsk Cossack groupings, or from Chechen Republic. So they are mercenaries. And what we expected from Russia to do, to respect their international obligations as to the mercenaries, they should address their population, warning them about the consequences and criminal responsibility to be a part of any mercenary groups. So it never happened. It never happened, and this is what we are addressing now to Russia instead of sending messages which are not practical, but to address their own people, to leave Ukraine and not to be qualified as a mercenaries, and to inform them that they are responsible before Russian Federation law as well.
I think that another one of the researchers, Mateo Stena, wanted to speak to this point.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank for the question of the Ambassador of Latvia. I'd like to thank for the opportunity to us to present here our report. And according to, relating to the first question, what else the states can do? We deal that with the report when you talk about recognition about what happened in Crimea. And we should look at the precedent of Northern Cyprus, where another country, in the case Turkey, pressed a political situation. It's really similar to what happened in Crimea. And it's qualified as illegal under international law, and it might trigger the Article 41 of the International Law Committee of the United States on State Responsibility. Therefore, any country that recognizes Crimea as part of Russia, recognize its secession, will be considered supporting that, and for that reason, Ukraine will have a claim against that country that recognizes the status of Crimea under any international court. So I think the country should be aware that the recognition of Crimea, because of its illegality, will have consequences on the international sphere for the country that recognizes. So it's another thing that's important to address.
I'm sorry, and it's a very good point you raised. I suppose my colleagues in the mission, they did it yesterday. I'm not sure, but they should finalize it today. We are sending to all the missions, members of the United Nations, the law on temporary occupied territory of Ukraine. So this is the state law. We got the rapid translation with the help of Group Razom. So I think this opportunity to thank them to help with the translation. You'll have the English version of this law. This is very important for the member states. Why? Because this state law invites all the member states to respect the provisions of this law as to the contacts with this temporary occupied territory, in terms of the visits, in terms of the communications, in terms of trade. After the resolution on territorial integrity has been adopted, we made several additional steps. There is provision in that law, and you are also will be informed or have been already informed. International Maritime Organization made a decision not to recognize any register except the Ukrainian register for the marine fleet in the ports of Crimea, as well as not to recognize the seaport authorities in the Crimea. ICAO, International Aviation Authority, took the decision not to recognize any other authorities as to the airspace or the territory of Crimea, but Ukrainian only. So this law is very practical and important for the partners to support Ukraine and not to recognize the authorities on that territories, and it will be very, very helpful for the future. Thank you.
So I'd like to open the floor to other questions. Please raise your hand or indicate in some way, press the red button so that we can hear your question. And please limit yourself to questions and not open-ended statements at this point. And the authors are here to answer. Thank you. Thank you.
First, I'd like to recognize Razom for a wonderful contribution. I think that with the support of the ad hoc group at NYU, you've made a major contribution in the West and for the world, and here at the United Nations, to move the agenda of Ukraine forward. Thank you. Дуже вам дякуємо і вітаємо вас. My question is, what is your expectation of work that needs to be completed? How will you build on this formation of this report? What are your expectations moving forward, and how can the people in this room help you with that?
Thank you for your question. Well, it's very important to understand how multidimensional the problem is. This is not only Ukraine that is in the center of this problem, of this crisis. This is basically, we see the repeat of the situation for the second time. This is basically, we witnessed this with exactly what happened with Georgia already, and we see very similar pattern that has happened. It's happening in Ukraine right now. This is not about Ukraine per se. It's not about Europe. It's about each and every country again, because this may happen to new Europe countries. This may happen. There are no guarantees this may not actually happen again. So there are different things that can be done and could be done. Some of them are addressed with the recommendations. Obviously, some of them have to be addressed on the government levels. Absolutely, we believe that different organizations can play and have to play a key role in this attempt to stabilize and pay attention to the human rights crisis. We know what happened in Crimea when one day people woke up and the houses were marked with crosses. And it's 2014 today, and we know when people were registered, were asked to register that they belong to a particular minority group. We heard Russian president call the Ukrainian citizens second sort citizens. So we witnessed something that is really dramatic happening. We don't know where it's exactly going, but definitely we have to pay attention. We cannot ignore what's going on, and we have to play a very important role in each and every possible way. There are refugees who escaped, and many of them actually are in the western part of Ukraine. It's not addressed by our report. There is so much we can address in the report, obviously, but we read the news. The Crimean Tatars right now, some of them escaped to the western part of Ukraine, some of them escaped abroad. We know that people from not only Crimean Tatars, but other people, other voices from Crimea groups are escaping. We know that the Ukrainian Catholic Church is being persecuted in Crimea, that the priests had been abducted. And we know that still hostages are, that the militant groups are holding hostages. We know that OSCE mission has been released, but there are still more than 20 people who are held hostages. So we have to pay very close attention. If you're a journalist, write about this. If you're a lawyer, work on this. If you're an organization that is concerned with human rights, talk about this, discuss this. If you're governments, don't stay away, because you never know when it's gonna knock on your door. And of course, don't just be active and vocal about this. Thank you.
Yes, Alex Goodko.
Thank you, Mary. I'd like to add to that, and I absolutely agree. I'm not sure what the states themselves can do at this point, but one of the reasons for this report, for appearance of this report, is to spread the news, because the so-called informational hunger that existed shortly after March 16 events was really, really spectacular. People in Ukraine really understood. All of my friends, colleagues, they understood what was happening. However, friends in the US, in the European Union, everyone was asking questions. There was not enough information in the press, and a lot of information, as we know now, has been distorted. A lot of notions have been substituted. So basically, we wanted this report to be neutral. We wanted to approach it from a legal perspective. I myself am Ukrainian, but in this report we were trying to be Ukrainian and international lawyers, and we wanted to raise this as a concern. I would like to emphasize the role of free press. Of course, the governments will not control the press, but they can ensure that there's enough information that this issue of secession of Crimea is still being addressed, because the events in eastern Ukraine at this point are kind of taking the attention away from the situation in Crimea. And I'd like to remind everyone in the room that the Crimean population mostly lived off summer seasons and the tourist industry. And this summer, at least I expect, in my personal opinion, I expect this to be a really dramatic and really sad season and a sad summer in Crimea. So that situation has to be dealt with now. And one of the reasons to write this report is to basically reach this conclusion. This dispute, this conflict, it needs an international forum, and it's nowhere to be found at this point. When Georgia faced a similar threat, it was a different situation, but when Georgia faced a similar threat, they had to go to the International Court of Justice, and in order to assert jurisdiction, they had to refer to the Convention on basically on combating and removing discrimination, and that was basically a territorial dispute. And the question for the international community at this point is, what do we do with conflicts like this if they are not being resolved in a diplomatic way, in a timely manner? Which is the forum? At this point, we were not able to find any immediate jurisdiction for the International Court of Justice. We made certain recommendations with respect to advisory opinions, but probably this is the main concern. We need a forum. That's the message we want to convey today.
And we also wanted to bring everyone's attention to the fact that if international law and order is basically non-existing, we cannot prosper. We cannot have a democratic existing. We cannot exist in such a world that was specifically created to prevent wars. We have to respect the Budapest Memorandum, we have to respect international treaties, we have to respect the UN Charter, we have to respect the unilateral obligations, and we have to respect the world order that was created. And basically what is happening today, we're witnessing that it's not respected. It's totally, it's basically, the UN Charter, I feel like it's totally shredded, and it's not really taken into consideration, and it's very sad what's going on.
Yes, question in the back? Yes.
What can lawyers in private practice in New York do to support your efforts?
Repeat the question, please.
What can lawyers in private practice do to help? Well, I'm in private practice. I had some human rights experience while I was in school. I'm an Ukrainian-American. I believe in democracy, so those things, I mean, it's just basically reading the books and writing. And what we're facing also today is the huge information war. And unfortunately, Russia engaged in very disingenuous acts by misrepresenting the facts, and this is very disturbing. So everyone can write and can voice their opinion and bring this to everyone's attention, basically. I'm sure there is going to be a need for another report similar on human rights. What has happened, the human rights violations that happened since November, and they're still happening, haven't been addressed. The country will need closure. Many issues need to be addressed, and lawyers, journalists, everyone who can help has to help.
I think that people in private practice can join with other nonprofits such as Razom. I know there are many others. That's really how this project came into being, was people in private sector, students, a nonprofit, the governments all working together. I think that's a model. Elena?
I just would like to add that it's a very good approach to engage with organizations in Ukraine and US. And I hear calls from Ukrainian organizations. Now they are trying to organize some monitoring groups, because still some prosecution is going on, court proceedings. And as it was mentioned, there is informational war, and we need someone from outside to watch and then report what is really happening in English, in all possible languages, so the people know what's going on and how Ukrainians are dealing with this situation. So if you have a time, if you have a possibility to devote some time, please go to Ukraine, observe, and write, communicate with your friends, colleagues, and everyone you can.
Thank you. Yes, Vladimir.
How would you like to see this report being used? Would you like it to see being used in, what you just mentioned, informational war, or would you like it to see more serious legal implications? How would you like it to be used at this arena, at the United Nations?
I think I will take that. Thank you. This report is a legal report, but it was basically put together to convey the message and to give correct information and some legal analysis. We were happy to see that it was already quoted in certain articles in the press that we found online. I don't remember the name of the journal, but World Affairs Journal. It was quoted there. So this is what we are expecting this report to be. Some may disregard this as a one-sided report, and that's what we were trying to avoid. We wanted to approach this from a legal perspective and avoid any one-sided comments. The role of this report is also important to basically refute some myths that exist about Ukraine. And there is no better authority than to refer to yourself. I'm Ukrainian. I lived most of my life in Kiev, and I'm in New York only since 2013. I was born in a Russian-speaking family, and I traveled all over Ukraine. I never experienced any problem with using Russian or Ukrainian, and most of my friends and peers, they considered two languages being an advantage rather than a problem. This would happen in Lviv, where I would go at least once a year. My grandfather lived in Odessa, which is at the south of Ukraine. My mother was born in Lugansk, which is the closest Ukrainian region to the territory of Russia today. And this is the most important thing to convey. People in Ukraine do not see a civil war. There is no contradiction between speaking different languages. There are certain domestic issues that have to be dealt with domestically, and Ukrainian people did a pretty good job of keeping this conflict internal, people against the government, at a certain stage. But then this conflict shifted to the international arena, and that's where Ukraine cannot go on its own. That's where we need the support of the international community. Thank you.
Also, it's very important to understand that Ukraine is the diverse country, and I myself as well, I was born in Ukraine. I never experienced any problem with speaking Ukrainian language or Russian language. I am fluent in both languages. My native language is Ukrainian. But what's very important that is happening right now, we are witnessing major human rights violation that are happening, and with respect to indigenous people, with respect to other minorities, and even with respect to Ukrainian people. The problem is that Ukraine is a new it's not the problem. Ukraine is a new democracy, and it's working. It has been working hard to achieve those democratic goals. Of course, has been very badly mismanaged for the last 25 years, and this is the major problem, obviously. However, with respect to Crimea, I would like to bring to your attention that actually Crimean Tatars were able to come back to their homeland only when Ukraine became independent, and before Ukraine became independent, Crimea was just a region, and Ukraine gave Crimea autonomous status, and which actually absolutely works with the international law and the right of succession, if such exists. And more than 200 200,000 Crimean Tatars were able to come back to Crimea, and now they're facing the second generation. Ukraine was very prompt to respond to its citizens and their requests and recognize them as indigenous people. This is very important, of course, to understand and to remember. Thank you.
Just go to the table of contents of the report. Yes, yes, thank you.
Can you hear? Yes. Martha Caballo, World Federation of Ukrainian Women's Organizations. Your report focuses in some part on the energy, the business of energy as an underpinning for Russian imperialist aggression and ambitions in terms of transmission of the production and also the exploration for energy, which is subject now. There are a few contracts in the making. Is there any evidence for a reaction from the international business world to your report at this time?
Thank you for this question. We were really expecting this. This is one of the features of our report. We wanted it to be unique by addressing the energy issue first, and it's often overlooked at this point because the issue is shifted towards languages, ethnicities, nationalities, but this is not the core of the problem, in our opinion. There were certain and pretty substantial efforts by the Ukrainian government to become more independent in terms of its energy. And international oil and gas companies have helped immensely to do this. There were a number of production sharing agreements already signed, and a number were in the pipeline to develop the unconventional gas resources in the east and western parts of Ukraine, as well as to develop the natural resources on the sea shelf in Crimea. And that's why we think that the occupation of the territory of Crimea is key in terms of natural gas and natural resources exploration. At this point, you asked about reactions of the companies. Well, one production sharing agreement which was signed by the Italian corporation Eni together with French company EDF for exploration off the coast in Crimea. According to the interview of the CEO of this company with CNN, they're basically standing by to see how the conflict is resolved. So the reaction of business at this point is to just wait and see what the governments will do. And the CEO of Eni also stressed that previously when their company faced such situations in history, they are usually, they are used to the new government controlling the territory to negotiate with them and to basically respect the arrangements reached with the previous government. Well, I sincerely hope that this will not happen at this point, and that Ukraine will be able to control its own territory eventually. But the key message in our report is that Ukraine finally got its chance, and we're here in the US where unconventional gas basically resulted in a natural resources revolution. And at this point, there's more gas in the US than the US needs to consume, and there are a lot of talks about exporting liquefied natural gas to Europe. That's what Ukraine was relying on, and companies, I will not be telling names, but a number of companies, and I got to work for one of them for 9 months in Ukraine. I was able to see the technology they were able to bring to Ukraine. And this technology and this experience was nowhere to be found before that. And one may only think of what role that could play in this conflict. But at this point, there is nothing going on in Crimea in terms of exploration of natural gas. The city of Slavyansk, which is suddenly became popular, I never heard about it and lived in 25 or 26 years in Ukraine. But the problem with this city is that it's located close to where international company Shell has already started drilling for unconventional gas. And this is just our suspicion that might play a certain role in this conflict. I hope I answered your question.
Yes.
Actually, I have one more question that may seem very much a wild card and a little strange, but in your minds, is there any connection between Russia's hosting the Sochi Olympics and their readiness to invade the Crimean Peninsula on such short order?
Thank you. I will just, well, that is probably out of scope of our report. We have not analyzed that from a legal perspective. But I think your question relates to timing. Like, why did it happen at this point in time? And in terms of timing, the issue addressed in our report is the impossibility to combine the right to self-determination of certain ethnicities and the use of force. That's what we've seen in Crimea and hope not to see anywhere else. We would like to point to the fact that during the past 20 years, I personally have not heard of any news coming out of Crimea that somebody wants a referendum there. Maybe people would have certain concerns with the government, as any normal citizen has at any state, but there was no such concern. And for some reason, at the moment when the country was really weak, having suffered a lot of deaths and having gone through a really painful and first time in history revolution, we suddenly got to such an important development as a referendum on a territorial issue. And we just think that it's absolutely unacceptable to combine the use of force and any kind of polling, voting, or referenda on territorial or any other issues. We have to recover from the revolution first, basically, and to be able to stand up on our feet and then deal with the problem internally. And principles of international law are clear on that. There is just no intervention into the internal relations of other states. Thank you.
Yes, question over here in the back.
Thank you. Lada Pastushak, U.S. Ukraine Business Council. I'd actually like to go back to the first question, which was just asked recently, in regards to the business community. I noticed in your report that you focus primarily on Crimea and the issue of pipeline politics, but in light of Russia moving its troops to the eastern border, I know you didn't really focus on the future of what may happen, but maybe in what you did see. Was there any indication that this is also to capture the heavy industry infrastructure, which is in southeastern Ukraine? So everything from natural resources, aerospace and defense capabilities, which have actually been supplying Russia for decades, if not longer than that. If you could touch on that, please.
We definitely did not go into detail on that, and we sincerely hope that nothing in the eastern Ukraine will be captured. However, in Crimea, the national energy company, if I'm not mistaken, the name is Chornomornaftogaz, was nationalized, and I think it's controlled by Gazprom at this point. It was confirmed in the press. I'm not sure about official confirmation, so I cannot confirm that, but that is definitely what has happened in Crimea. And it's everything. It's the natural resources that are, in the soil. It's the infrastructure. I wouldn't say that Ukraine had too much infrastructure, but it was starting to seriously develop this, and there was a lot of foreign investment and domestic investment put into exploration of natural resources. So at this point, we just think that the events that happened there are unacceptable. And I will not be discussing this with respect to Eastern Ukraine because I'm pretty sure that nothing else should happen, at least at this point.
Elena?
Short comment to your question, like, we are not sure what was in the mind of Russia officials, but I guess me and my colleagues, we are sure that with what's going on in Eastern Ukraine, Ukraine has a lot to lose. Like, as it was mentioned, infrastructure, natural resources, people resources, everything. So I know what Russia will gain. We can elaborate that, but Ukraine will lose a lot.
Also, we touched a little bit on that subject again when the report was coming out. the large military presence was already from Russia was present on the eastern border. And so we touched on the page 28, the situation in eastern Ukraine, and basically what we're witnessing right now has very similar patterns to what happened in Crimea. And with the news coming out about the referendum on May 11, it's very disturbing because we know the March 16 referendum in Crimea was absolutely unlawful by the domestic and international standards. It happened under, one can argue it happened under duress with green men, that's the way they are called in Ukraine, with no insignia present, with heavy weapons. Thank you.
Yes.
My name is Nadia Schmigel, and I represent the World Federation of Ukrainian Women's Organizations. My question is, what is your thinking about organizing a group of people who would meet with major companies and work on divestment of their money in projects sponsored by Russia?
Well, this can be addressed privately. I mean, this is definitely out of scope of our report and our, the forum currently. But we can address this. We can discuss this privately, obviously. Thank you for your question.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Valery Kuczynski. Thank you very much. This is an extraordinary event, really. I was late a bit, but I read the report. My question is, do you plan, or what are your plans to sort of distribute this publication in this country or globally? Specifically, in view of what Russia Today TV station is doing, or whatever, mass media, Russian mass media, which is available all over the world. So the significance of this report is really, no question about it. What are your plans? How do you plan to sort of distribute it? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. It has been already distributed, and we got in the United States. It has been we got quote unquote. It's been called the excellent source for policymakers and analysts in the Congress. It has been distributed in the State Department. We know it has been sent to the White House and to the White House Press Corps. It has been distributed in Europe through personal connections in the diplomatic community, and it's basically available online, and everyone is welcome to use the social media and any just word of the mouth type. And of course, we are planning, if it's feasible, of course, we might publish this in a law review, and obviously we encourage more reports like this coming out and more analysis like this coming out to have a civilized discussion about what's going on, because the problems are not going away. Thank you.
Katerina?
If I may, thank you very much for your comments and for the question. I think this question goes towards what we have actually asked you guys to do, which is to help us, and this is one way that all of you can help us, is to spread the word. It is very valuable for us to hear that you actually support and agree with this, or at least a lot of you do. And it's valuable for us to hear that you actually believe that this will make a difference. It is now, in a lot of ways, up to you to tell people that you do agree with us, that this is important, and to spread the word. And if there are any journalists here, obviously we would like you to spread the word. As we have said, this is available to anybody who wants it, and we do encourage it being used. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Katerina. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Annika Nelson with the Mission of Norway. Thank you very much for an interesting introduction of the report. I don't have a question, but I have just a small comment for the completeness in this report. I'm looking at the table of sanctions, and Norway did impose the EU sanctions, and I cannot see that reflected in the report. And I should, for the completeness, I see that Switzerland, which did impose bilateral sanctions, but Norway on the 18th of March, so you should include that in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll address this. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Yes, in the back.
This is also to the, my name is Victoria Baranetsky.
Could you go to a microphone just so that everyone can hear you? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Victoria Baranetsky. I'm a First Amendment attorney in New York. My question or comment is also sort of to the completeness of the report, which I very much enjoyed, but I was wondering whether there were any plans in adding an amendment. As you say, that there's a war on information, and I think the report could benefit greatly by some comments about freedom of information, as well as the attack on the press and surveillance within the country, particularly with in regards to recent events. Could you comment on that, please?
Thank you for your question. Absolutely, we would love. It's the of course we have to have more capacity to work on this further. So volunteers are welcome, obviously. And this is again goes to how you can help. I'm sure Razom is working on some projects to address, and some other projects to reflect the informational war. And obviously that's also where you can utilize your expertise and knowledge, which are very valuable to all of us. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
Irina Mazur, Ukrainian Federation of America, and also a member of Razom team. I would like to ask, coming back to the Budapest Memorandum, as we know about guarantors of the Ukrainian sovereignty, country guarantors, they signed that they will protect integrity of Ukraine's sovereignty. So it's a legal binding document. And at this point, the Ukrainian sovereignty is broken. The part of Ukraine is annexed. So my question is, did you, Ivanna, or your team have intent to analyze the memorandum by itself and the consequences of the breach of a legal international document? And because at this point, I would consider inadequate action by international community toward Russia is a lack of action. I would consider it almost as a breach, because at this point, the actions that are taken toward Russia, they are not sufficient, they are too slow. Ukrainian people, they died until the first set of action were taken. At this point, the economical sanctions, which were pulled upon the Russia, they are not directed to the key people who are responsible for the Russian politics. So I would like to hear your comment on that if you can. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. About the Budapest Memorandum, first, some of the news we were looking into, they were not qualifying them as a treaty. Say it's not a treaty, it's not binding to the parts of the Budapest Memorandum. However, we put in our report that it qualifies as a unilateral declaration of each stage. And our precedent, I think that's most strong here, that it's binding to its countries. It's the case of on ICJ between France, Australia, and New Zealand, where France declared that will not do any nuclear tests in South Pacific, and in the 7th France withdraw this decision, and Australia and New Zealand had a claim against France. They took it to the court, and the court said Australia and New Zealand had the reason that declaration binds France to follow what they said before. And in the case of the Budapest Memorandum, I think it's clear what happened. It was the guarantee to Ukraine that by the time I think had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And there was the guarantee to Ukraine that its borders will be respected. It will respect in that context of the end of Cold War. And I truly believe that Russia can be it's responsible in the international sphere, under international law. Because of that, it breached one of its obligations. It's clear. So the consequence to that, it's in the treaty of nuclear weapons, because Ukraine made a reservation, and if you look the reservation made by Ukraine in the treaty, it clearly states that if this guarantee that we have, the Budapest Memorandum, is breached, we can renounce the treaty, we can denounce the treaty, and we can then go on developing nuclear weapons. I think the world does not want any other nuclear power anymore. I think we are going to the opposite action in the last 20 years of reducing the nuclear weapons in the world, not building. So I think it's dangerous. I think Russia should rethink what it did, because it might trigger another nuclear escalade in a particular region of the world, and we see the consequence that had in India and Pakistan of a nuclear escalade. So that's the importance of the Budapest Memorandum in this case.
Alex?
I just wanted to add that the ironic part is that when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, Ukraine gave them up to Russia and received a guarantee of its territorial integrity in exchange. So that basic agreement and that deal was broken at this point, was breached. And I know that there was a draft law registered in the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, that is the Ukrainian parliament, on denunciation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I'm pretty sure that it did not go forward at this point, and Ukraine is not interested probably in developing its nuclear weapons, but Ukraine really needs to stand up for itself and protect its territorial integrity. So at this point we identified a clear, undisputed ground for Ukraine to denounce that treaty, and this might just set a really bad precedent for other parts of the world, where some states would want to denounce the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They would seek grounds for this. We would want to prevent that international precedent from happening.
And we try to we covered this in the chapter 5, but definitely it needs more study and exposure. Thank you for your question.
Yes, question on the right. To my right, yes.
I was wondering, are there any international legal mechanisms that would prevent companies from cooperating with Russia, at least on the territory of Ukraine? Like you said, Shell is beginning to drill near Slavyansk. Could that be prevented?
Can you please clarify the mechanisms by the private sector, or?
No, are there international legal mechanisms that could prevent the private sector from cooperating with Russia on the territory of Ukraine?
Well, at this point, the international mechanisms are sanctions, and basically the government's attitude towards the events in Ukraine. Companies always take that into account. Any investor procures political risk insurance, and any substantial foreign investment does not happen without the involvement of governments. We can here address a lot of the bilateral investment treaties that Ukraine is a part to, and at certain point investors might seek to protect their rights and their property in Ukraine, because they couldn't basically have any profit from their initial investment. And at this point Ukraine has done nothing wrong to prevent those businesses from working. So we have a really strange international legal situation at this point, where the businesses are prevented from doing what they need to by a different state on the territory of the neighbor state. At this point, we already said that we require a forum, and there is not too many international legal mechanisms that the state can use to get out of this. And that's why we heavily rely on diplomatic channels. That's why this is really important. But preventing, I wouldn't want investors to be prevented from coming to Ukraine. I think the message should be quite the contrary. I think the company should continue doing that, and the government should be able to stabilize the situation in Ukraine. For example, a company called Chevron has a production sharing agreement in the western part of Ukraine, and I'm pretty sure that the operations are continuing at this point.
Ivanna, did you want to add?
With respect to work, I mean, it's very important to understand that this is a global threat. This is a threat to global peace and security. So, and in this when the international law and order doesn't exist, we cannot profit. We cannot basically have normal business relationship, and this is very important to understand. We can talk about political will, and we know historically it has been done with respect to other countries, obviously, when they have been isolated from the their business dealings, and has been done very successfully. Definitely, the governments and international community has to consider those tools. Thank you.
I think we have time for a last question. Anyone? Yes. Yes, thank you. Let's see, so two questions. The young woman and then the gentleman here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Rin Lee. I'm representative of World Information Transfers. I just wanted to ask if there was anything the youth population can do to help out with the problem in Crimea. Yes, that's my question.
Crimea. Alena?
I think we mentioned before that you can spread your word. You can go to Ukraine if you have time, and if you are young, I believe you still have more time. You can go to Ukraine, you can observe, you can communicate and write. If you have young professionals, it will be good to share some experience. Like, let's remember that army conflict is only one dimension of the crisis in Ukraine. Ukraine now are under the reform. So you can focus on Crimea and issues of human rights violated there, such as voting rights, property rights, dignity rights, and so on. We can continue. But you can also focus on the rest of Ukraine and reformations which are needed there.
If I may add, I think it's really worth pointing out. When reading the news on different websites, and really prominent websites, you see a lot of comments by users. And if you really know what's going on in Ukraine, you would suspect that a lot of those users are just artificially created bots, or just people who are hired to comment on certain issues in certain ways. So the youth community that uses the internet a lot could probably be aware of events in Ukraine and could support the comments that are correct and raise certain concerns about the comments that are incorrect. And I totally agree with Elena. Travel to Ukraine and see what's going on for yourself. My mother worked on the central square of Maidan. She's a piano player, and the Kiev Conservatory is located right in the center of Maidan. She went to work every single day during the events of this winter, and you know, a lot of stuff has happened at this point, but Ukraine is still remains a safe country, and we encourage everyone to come and just see for yourself what's going on, that there is no conflict between people in the country.
Yes, last question.
My name is Francois Igor Mazur. I'm a private attorney in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My question is whether there's been consideration given to the possibilities, or indeed whether actions have already been taken regarding the possibility of forcing public and private companies that are profiting from activities in conquered territories that are making deals with the Russians, whether they could be forced to disgorge any revenues that they would be unjustly earning by doing so.
Well, recently I've heard that the United States studying to deny tax credits to the companies that are benefiting from those activities. And I think it's an important tool that the other countries might use, is to deny credits on the revenue that their companies are receiving on this region, and or any profits they have on this kind of activities with the Russian invaders and so on. And I think it's really important that countries like Netherlands, United States, United Kingdom, Ireland, that have huge money flow, and it's important into the tax community that they have a really powerful weapon if they tax those income, and if they do not deny credits or even give credits to the companies that are cooperating with the Ukrainian government in this crisis. So that's a powerful tool that each country has to, and they can use that.
So thank you all. Do you want to add
Just one-
quickly? Yes.
I think the very good measure would be not to recognize some contracts which were made based on the Russian law or local Crimean, for example, law, because there are some sectors of industry which are regulated, heavily regulated by national administrative law, and now there is a conflict of laws, and I think each country would do well not recognizing such contracts. I know that the scope of these industries are very limited, but still it will be huge punishment for such companies, and usually those are big companies.
So thank you all so much for your kind attention. Thanks, Ambassador Sergeyev. Thanks to Razom for making this possible, and to all the authors. Thank you very much.